Born ready.
Were you?
Because you couldn't have been born there. It's not possible.
Just a baby. You were innocent.
Welcome everybody to the film series, the CPC film series for this spring. My name is Professor Paul Miller. I know many of you here. First of all, thank you so much for spending your Friday evening with us. It is always such a pleasure that we get to do this every single term. I do want to give a shout out to Library Director Margaret Shakti back there, and also the jack of all trades, but most importantly, the jack of all trades of our hearts, Dr. Jared Reif up here. So it's a collaborative effort between the three of us to keep the CPC film series going, and it's a labor of love for us. It's something that we really enjoy doing. I had the honor of presenting last term on my birthday for Groundhog Day, and I appreciate all of you who were here for that. But this term we went in a different direction. Nick Hogan has been our CPC film series correspondent for the last almost 2 years. Had some big shoes to fill coming in after Dylan Bowman, who was the correspondent prior to him. But Nick has embraced this role, and when we were looking for somebody to present this term, the one thing that we were thinking is, you know, let's give another student a shot. We've had students do it in the past, but they're typically people who are very, very dedicated to the film series, of which Nick is, and I will never forget the look on Nick's face when I asked him to do it, and he accepted. So this is not only a big deal for the school, but it's a really big deal for Nick. And Nick has 100% earned it. He's done such a great job at the Nightly News. He just got his first officer position as he's our new secretary, so let's give him a round of applause. There's no one else we'd want to do this, so we're looking forward to hearing what he has to say about a classic movie in Labyrinth. Just a quick shout out before we have Nick up. We do have something special over the summer. We're doing a small film festival of short films from local filmmakers. So we're going to be announcing more information about that in the next couple of weeks, so keep posted for that, okay? In the meantime, I want to have Nick up and talk a little bit more about Labyrinth. That's why we're all here, so welcome, Nick.
A lot of movies that are from the 1980s and the 1990s. A lot of them are actually nostalgic to me because I grew up with a lot of VHS and DVDs from my parents' childhood. Because of that, a lot of different movies stood out to me. But I think Labyrinth is one of the movies that stood out to me the most, and I think the reason for it is just how dedicated it is to using practical effects to elevate a story. And I will go into more of that later. But I think that my favorite part of the film series in general, and why I love coming even when I'm not presenting, is that it brings everyone together for me, or not just me, but everyone, to talk about a movie that they hold near and dear to their heart. And I think because people love what they talk about, other people love what people are passionate about, and they love to listen to it. I mean, I didn't think I would like a war movie called 1917, and I ended up loving it. And I'm not into a lot of historical movies. But the film series in general just brings out, I think, the best in Central Penn College because people can share what makes them them. And I think one of the things that makes a person and who they are is their interest in film and media. Labyrinth came out on July 27th, 1986. It follows a 16-year-old girl named Sarah Williams. She is played by Jennifer Connelly, who, if you don't know, she actually has won an Best Supporting Actress for the Academy Awards in 2001. I do not remember the film, and I apologize for that. So the movie follows her as she traverses a twisted, dark fantasy called The Labyrinth, because it's shaped like a maze, that she formed in her own head as she wishes for her little brother Toby to be taken away. It makes more sense when you watch the movie, trust me. The characters, like I said, there's Jennifer Connelly as Sarah. There's also the late David Bowie as the Goblin King, Jareth, who is the main antagonist of the story. And then several other actors that play the actual puppet characters in the film, which you will see in this film. It's incredible puppetry and ventriloquism, because not everything is just like a Kermit the Frog puppet. A lot of it is early animatronic work that's used now in like modern theme parks and modern films. And a lot of it is what would revolutionize the movement of CGI, even though this film doesn't have a lot of it. I will get into one of the uses of CGI that the film has, but yeah. George Lucas actually produced this film. It's May 3rd, so tomorrow is Star Wars Day. I'm not a Star Wars fan much, but it's a George Lucas film, so I mean, we're kind of bringing in the season, even though it's not Star Wars. That wasn't intentional, but then the date it fell on, I was like, well, I gotta talk about that. I loved this movie as a kid. Like I said, we had cable, but it was a very primitive cable when I was younger, so all I would really watch was Nicktoons, Cartoon Network, and Boomerang. And some PBS, but I don't like a lot of PBS properties. So my parents usually gave me a lot of DVDs. I hated watching live action stuff as a child. I don't know why. I think I just like, if it's not animated, it's not good. The only exception I would make to that was Jim Henson franchises, because one of my earliest favorite shows was the Jim Henson show. It was Fraggle Rock. And my parents had that on VHS, and I loved watching that show. And then obviously I loved the older Muppets, the older Sesame Street. And even though I don't watch their newer stuff, I still have a deep appreciation for it, because I wouldn't be the nerd and artist that I am without those, because it just shows that if you put love and passion into a craft, it can show everyone else that that's worth paying attention to. The older I get, I also get a stronger connection to this film in particular because of its message on growing up. It doesn't necessarily say that having interests that can be seen as childish are a bad thing. It just says that you need to embrace growing up and not live in the past. I think you'll see a lot of that when you watch the film, because it's much more subtle as you watch the film, but you grow along with the characters of the movie as you watch it. The main character especially being Sarah. The whole movie is her movie. It's about her overcoming her own issues given full. I think this film is like a huge bookmark in the dark fantasy trend of the 1980s. It is also seen past the 80s. Some films I can think of are like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Harry Potter to an extent. But if you look at a lot of older 80s films that were fantasy, a lot of them have this like dingy, dirty style. And I personally always found it really charming. It has a very 80s feel to it. Another film I can think of is The Neverending Story, if you've seen that. It has a very similar vibe. And today, I think CGI can often be used as a substitute for films. Like, a lot of people use CGI as their spectacles. I think what this film does even better than that is that it does have some slight uses of CGI, but it's elevating the already existing practical effects that the movie maintains. And there's a topic on the post-production side of it. The post-production for this film was actually very brief and quick because they had so much practical effects that were caught on camera already, which I find incredible because you would never see that now. If you look at behind the scenes for films nowadays, it's almost entirely green screens. Labyrinth has also influenced a lot of what I do. I'm an artist, I'm a cartoonist, singer. I love theater, even though I haven't done it since high school, but of course I still love theater. I think the reason is that it showed me that you can create a fantasy world and have your own adventures in it while also still being able to be a human and grow up and live a normal life. I know that sounds very cheesy, but what I mean is that it's like a form of escapism to me. And this film tackles the topic of escapism very well. And I think that it also shows escapism is a good thing, but you need to know when to blur or like to cross the line between reality and your interests in fiction. It's also like some of the main reason I do enjoy live action films now. I'm not prejudiced against live action or cartoon anymore. That's not really a thing that I do. I've loved several live action films from the 80s, 90s, and nowadays that have no cartooniness or CGI to them. I do still love animation, but now as an adult, I prefer live action stuff because I think there's a lot more quality in a lot of them. Although I can definitely recognize how challenging it is to make animated work. I think the reason I love Jim Henson's work specifically is that it's not animated, but it feels so cartoony, and it's in real life, which I think not a lot of things do that anymore without making it feel disingenuous. Because if you look at a lot of kids' movies now that are live action that blend cartoons with them, you can tell it's like an overlay. But what Jim Henson's movies did was they would use a live action set, but they would have characters that existed in that world but weren't human. And I really wish there were more movies like that. So the making of this movie, it actually had 25 script rewrites. It was in development from 1983 to 1985 before it actually began production and released in 1986. It was actually, in my research, it's one of the very first blockbuster films that used star power as a selling point, being David Bowie's performance. This wasn't the first example of a star being a guest star in something, because it was often used in sitcoms for special episodes to maintain viewership. But this is one of the biggest examples where an actual star's name is used as like the marketing for the movie. Jennifer Connelly at the time was very underrated, but like I said, she went on to gain Academy Awards and is very recognized today as a very popular actress. Also, I found this out during my research for this, is that David Bowie, he wanted to be involved from the very beginning. One of his dreams was to be involved in making a live action family friendly film, and he wanted to make the music and play a character in it. That's true. But what I found out was they actually considered Michael Jackson to be the Goblin King, Prince to be the Goblin King, and even Mick Jagger to be the Goblin King. And I don't want to imagine a world where that happened. I love them all, but this movie is not the movie it is without David Bowie's work. It's just not. And speaking of the man himself, he's the main reason that so many others love this film. I love David Bowie too. He's not the main reason I love this film, but he's also the reason that a lot of people hold it in high regard today. And he's also the reason why the film has such a cult status, because David Bowie himself, while he is a rock star and has a huge following, he does also have a cult following that adores everything he's done. And Jim Henson described in an interview about a couple of years after Labyrinth's release that Jareth, the character that David Bowie plays, is seen as a romantic hero, and he sees himself as a right in a world of wrongs. The interesting thing, though, and this isn't a spoiler, this is like established in the very beginning of the movie, is that Sarah made him because all of it is escapism. So is he really the antagonist of the film, or is she just seeing something that never existed in the first place? You'll have to watch to find out. And in future interviews, David Bowie actually saw his role as embarrassing, but he actually never looked back at it with vitriol or negativity. He said that he understands that that's the position that a lot of people hold him in regards to, and a lot of people's favorite version of David Bowie is this. It's actually my favorite version of him too. And so he knows of himself, he was never against being recognized as that. He just finds it embarrassing because he thinks he could have done the role a little bit better. Which everyone's had something like that, I'm sure. But this movie definitely cemented Bowie's stance as an icon in both music and film. And this movie masterfully blends the two together, not just as a musical, but as a film that has music, like rock music and pop music, not just a movie with songs that pull the story along. It's very different than like a Broadway show, for example. The world will forever be touched by David Bowie, in my opinion, especially since his untimely death in 2016. He was very young, I believe. I believe he was only like 50-something, like 58, 59. I could be wrong though, but that was almost 10 years ago already. And that's crazy to think about. He passed away 30 years after this film released. And he may have worn many faces during his career, but there's certainly only one David Bowie, in my opinion. Now, going to the post-production cycle, I did say how the film had a smooth production because there was not a heavy use of CGI. One of the exceptions for this was in the very opening credits, there is an owl that's animated. It actually is the first example of a realistic animal rendered for a film, which is very fascinating to me. I knew it was one of the earliest cases of CGI. I didn't know it was the first animal on film like that. And he's only on the screen for like 3 seconds. If you pause, you can definitely tell it's primitive by today's standards, but it's aged so gracefully in the fact that it warps you into the world of the movie, because later on in the film there are animatronic and real owls, so you don't really think about it, you know? So while we do focus on Jim Henson a lot with this film, which I will also get into in the next slide, George Lucas does have a heavy impact on this film. As a producer, he actually helped with Jim Henson edit the final cut. So the final cut that we watch is like 75% of George Lucas's work. So if you like Star Wars, there may be some kind of, I don't want to say inflections, but mannerisms of the shots and stuff that he used from his own films. Keep in mind, this film came out less than 10 years after the original Star Wars came out. So it's actually fairly new at this time. It's not as old as it is now. And I think that also shows as a testament to George Lucas's range, because when you think of directors and producers, a lot of them have similar genres. The best example I can think of is Michael Bay with action movies, or Wes Craven with horror movies. But what George Lucas did here, and Jim Henson too, because he had tackled a lot of child-friendly properties, is that they have range and are able to tackle many different subject matter for all ages. And I think that's very incredible. And I wish that more films were like that with directors. Even over 30 years after his passing, Jim Henson's legacy as a filmmaker has been felt through the entire industry. His Creature Workshop not only does a lot of special effects and puppet design now, they do animatronics, and a lot of them also do makeup, prosthetics and stuff. A lot of them are used in horror movies now because they're so detailed, and I think that's fascinating how different it is when you think about Kermit the Frog, Miss Piggy, and then you gotta think of terrifying things that can eat you whole. So Jim Henson, if you don't know, he made The Muppets, he made Sesame Street, Fraggle Rock, he made this movie. He also made The Dark Crystal, which is another 80s dark fantasy film from, I believe it's 3 or 4 years older than Labyrinth. I believe it's 1983. I actually see that film in many ways as a prototype of this film. I see it as him, because this is the very beginning of the dark fantasy trend that would happen in the 80s when he made The Dark Crystal. And that movie was successful, got a little negative critic reviews, but what good movie doesn't get negative critic reviews? It was successful enough for him to be able to make Labyrinth, which is a story he wanted to tell. And I think without The Dark Crystal, this movie wouldn't be what it is, because that helped him know what does and doesn't work in this kind of movie. Personally, The Dark Crystal creeps me out. I can't watch it. So, but also goes though to his range as a director. There's a movie that terrifies me, and the next movie he made I love. And without Jim Henson, I don't think, not only will the film industry be different than what it is today, because the Muppets have cemented themselves as a part of film history. By Muppets, I don't mean the characters, I mean his puppet characters. And without this movie, if it didn't have puppets and it was just a bunch of people in normal costumes, it would not be as good as it is. It really sells the world. Now, with so much going for it, would you believe me if I told you that this movie failed terribly at the box office? It only made about $9 million back. It had a $25 million budget, and it only made $34 million worldwide upon its initial release and run in 1986. However, the film did get a lot of attention once it became widely available on home releases on VHS, which I do believe a lot of films from the 80s did get that kickstart. This film was very lucky with the fact that Bowie was in it, so while it may not have worked for ticket sales, and Jim Henson may not have worked to boost the movie's success in the theaters, it worked for people wanting to rent a film, people wanting to take something home and watch with their families, and that boosted the film into cult status. And now it's seen as a cult classic over nearly 40 years. In 2 years, it'll be the 40th anniversary of this film. Now, because the film got a cult following, a huge fandom emerged from it. Labyrinth has spawned different clothing lines, jewelry, figurines, posters, and tons of other merch that I can't even begin to list off. Right here. It's also really popular in the convention space due to cosplayers. A lot of cosplayers have cosplayed the characters in this movie because of the elaborate designs. Not only do you have Jared's very 1980s, I don't want to say punk, rock design, glam rock design, you also have Sarah's very popular white dress that she'll wear later in the film, you'll see. So it's very popular in the fandom space, which ever since the internet popped off in the late 90s, it's also much more bigger even now than it was when it became widely available on VHS. And there is tons of forums, threads, channels, and videos and memes and stuff about this film that it gave it a second lease of life, and now it's seen as one of the best fantasy films ever and one of the best films of the 1980s. And now, because it was originally met with negative reviews from critics, nowadays, Rotten Tomatoes' audience score gave it an 86%. And it also has a pretty good for IMDb, 7.3 out of 10 score, which is very respectable for a film. Now, there are many themes of this film. I don't want to go too deep into them because that would spoil the movie, but the labyrinth itself represents Sarah's own personality and escapism and wanting to break free from her responsibilities as a growing woman. Jareth himself is an extension of this. He is made up in her mind and is seen as an antagonist that she is often after across the whole movie because he has kidnapped her little brother. However, she actually asked him to kidnap her little brother. So you'll see why she asks him that if you watch the film. Imagination, this film is a testament to the imagination that anybody can have. She's a young woman, she's 16 years old, not 9. But she's still able to use her imagination to literally live anywhere she wants and exist in this magical fantasy world. And I think as adults grow, they think they lose touch of their imaginative side, but it's always there. You'll always have your imagination and your artistry to fall back and also family sacrifice. While the main story follows her traversing the labyrinth, another subplot is her wanting to find her brother. While she wished ill will towards him originally, her whole mission is to save him. And I think that also speaks to the thing that we may say very hurtful things to those we love, but we never mean them. And us as family members or friends will stop at nothing to protect the ones we love. Now, before the show begins, I'd like to recap how this film has revolutionized what it means to be a fantasy film. Jim Henson's impressive puppet work has elevated this film from not just a dark fantasy masterpiece, but a puppetry and cinematic magnum opus, honestly. He made several films before this. This was one of his last films before he passed away in 1990. And honestly, I think this is a perfect way to end your legacy. It's a great film. It also popularized special effects and CGI in other films. The CGI used in the beginning of the movie made other studios interested in using CGI in their films, and now it's very common. It's way more used than puppets are, unfortunately. Now, the references, there's so many references to this film across all of social media. It's been and also just the film world in general. It's been referenced in The Simpsons, it's been referenced in the Legend of Zelda series, and it's been referenced in the live-action Lord of the Rings trilogy. By reference, I mean it takes more homages from it, sorry, I apologize. But, without further ado, I don't want to keep teasing you. Dance, magic, dance, or if the world is falling down, rock on and enjoy the show.